So, welcome everyone to our Sunday morning meditation. I'm Hugh Byrne and teach this Sunday morning class along with Regina and others. And really good to be with you in this Labor Day weekend. I hope your holiday weekend is going well and hope you're enjoying these late summer days. And so welcome to everyone on behalf of the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, IMCW, which is kind of the sponsor, the host of these classes, and also the Center for Mindful Living, which is a community, if you like, within the larger IMCW community. Formerly had a center in Tenley Town, but now online and somewhat in person as well. So welcome to you all. And if you're joining us for the first time, you might want to just put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. And very warm welcome to you all, and also to folks who've been regulars for some time. Just a little bit about me. I'm Hugh Byrne. I've been teaching for meditation since 2000 and with IMCW since 2003, so for about 20 years with IMCW. And I've been practicing somewhat longer than that. And we had a Sunday morning class going back to 2000, so it's been a regular thing at this time, and always good to share the teachings and the practices and practice together with everyone. The format, what I've done is begun with a meditation and then a talk. And is Emily with us today, Deb? Oh, there's Emily. I didn't see you. Yeah, great. Emily leads us in a meditation, a mindful movement, and a period of mindful movement. And then we have some time for sharing or questions, and then some announcements to finish. And we typically finish at, we try and finish at 12. And folks, if they would like to, can stay on afterwards for some more informal sharing of teachings and practices, and just some community time. And I typically stay around for a while, and maybe we can continue the discussions then. I'm going to do it a little bit differently today. What I'd like to do today is begin with just with a short meditation, not as long as the normal one, and then have the talk, and then maybe Emily can lead us in some movement, and then we'll have a longer meditation after that. So we'll just change it around a little bit today, explore how that goes. So, I invite you just for a few minutes to, if you would like to, you could close your eyes, just sit comfortably. Just let your attention come inward. Maybe take a deeper breath or two. Just let yourself arrive and settle, just to be here now. And just open to whatever is present for you right now. Whatever bodily feelings you're aware of. So if you can just allow them to come and to go in their own time. Meeting whatever's here with kindness, with care. Whatever mood or emotions you're aware of right now. if you can make space for them, for whatever's here. The invitation of this practice, mindfulness meditation, is to really meet our experience as it is. Just to turn our attention to what's present and meet it with kindness and with acceptance. Just saying yes to what is. Just feel yourself here with all of us together, in community, practicing together, waking up together. You might feel yourself supported by everyone else who's here, practicing together, and also feel yourself supporting everyone else. Just having the intention of meeting whatever is here with acceptance and kindness. Share this poem by Wu Men, 10,000 flowers in spring. 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, a cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. So again, welcome to everyone, and welcome to anyone who's joined us in the last couple of minutes. So just beginning with a short meditation, arriving. And what I'd like to to talk about today in the talk is really the kind of the core of these teachings and practices. The reason, in some way, that I think that we're all here, and we're all kind of practicing in whatever way, meditation and bringing these teachings into our lives in the different ways that we are. But I think what we're all looking for in some way is some greater ease and well-being and perhaps understanding, a lessening of some of the kind of more difficult states that we get caught up in: worry and stress, fear, craving, all of these qualities that I don't think we'd be here, any of us would be here, if we didn't think there was some value in practicing, in bringing our attention to our experience, in exploring these teachings, which, hold out the promise of greater freedom in our life, greater peace and well-being. And what's most interesting to me and feels most important in terms of these teachings and practices is the question of how we can live more freely with greater peace and greater ease and well-being in our lives. Being human can be a challenge. It can be, we can get caught up in a variety of mind states and emotions that feel difficult. I don't like this, I don't want this, why is this happening? And we get caught up in various kinds of tangles, and I think all of us are looking for some greater ease, greater peace, greater freedom in our lives. And that's essentially really what the Buddha's teachings are pointing to. Everything, all of the teachings really are around finding greater freedom in our lives, finding release from entanglements, from suffering, from grief and worry and things that are not necessary for our happiness and well-being. And the Buddha taught a central teaching on suffering and the end of suffering. He taught the Four Noble Truths about, it could simply be stated that when we cling to anything, we suffer. We try and hold on to anything. And when we let go of clinging, we find freedom from suffering. We gain greater ease, greater freedom. And the Buddha talked about these teachings of the Four Noble Truths. He used the image of an elephant's footprint. He said, friends, just as the footprint of any living being that walks can be placed within an elephant's footprint, so too all wholesome states can be included in the Four Noble Truths. So everything really fits within these teachings. Everything comes back to suffering and the end of suffering. The central question for the Buddha was, is it possible in this human life, in this human existence, to experience freedom? Probably most of you are familiar somewhat with the story of the Buddha's life, of the life of the person who became the Buddha, which really just translates into the awakened one, who became the awakened one. How he began his, he was born into luxury and comfort, having everything really that he could possibly want or need, and yet felt that something was missing, kind of came to understand that even with all of these comfort and privilege and luxury, he still was going to die. He was going to get sick, he would get old, he would die. So if that's true for everyone, what good is his wealth? What good is the luxury, the comfort, all the palaces, etc.? And that's what spurred him to leave all that behind. And I think about it, I think it's an act of courage to kind of let go of everything, all the things you're known by. This person is a noble person, it's a quote son of a prince, and then to kind of take off all the princely robes, etc., and put on the garb of a wandering ascetic, and cut off all his hair and go out and search to try and find an answer to this question: Is there an end to suffering? Is freedom possible in this life? And he studied with the teachers of his time. Probably similar path that many of us go on. Who do I resonate with? Teachers, and do they have something that might be helpful to me? And we listen, or we read, or all of that. And that's what the Buddha did, or the Siddhartha, as he then was, searching at, is freedom possible in this life? And he didn't find the answer with the teachers, although he obviously trained in meditation and all the skills of working with the mind, but he hadn't solved that problem. And then, he took you might say, a detour down another path, which is a very common one. It still is today in the, Indian subcontinent, of, wandering mendicants who are often, wearing very little in the heat of the day and the cold of the night, and not eating very much. And many are going through, paths of austerity, of punishing the body to free the heart, free the mind. And that's what the Siddhartha did. And but he had a recognition that this isn't the way to freedom. Just as luxury doesn't provide, a path to genuine spiritual freedom, nor does, this path of, self-flagellation, this, punishing the body. And he, after not eating food, or eating very little food, he starts to eat again, but he's still very committed to answering this question, to finding an answer to this question: is freedom from suffering possible? And as you know the story, I've sat under the tree in northern India, in Bodh Gaya, the peepal tree, and in a full moon night 2,500 years ago, he resolved that question. He let go of, with the remnants of whatever, of clinging, and was able to free himself from suffering. And there's a very famous kind of poetic statement of he made after, or has come down to us. He says, "Seeking but not finding the house builder, I travelled through the rounds of countless births. Oh, painful is birth ever and again." And then he says, "House builder, you have now been seen. You shall not build the house again. Your rafters have been broken down. Your ridgepole is demolished too. My mind has now attained the unformed nirvana, and reach the end of every kind of craving. So he realized for himself that letting go of clinging led to freedom, to freeing the heart and mind, to ending any, residual, habits of aversion, of hatred, of greed, of delusion. And, you might say he realized the deepest possibilities of human freedom, freedom in this human existence. And having realized, his awakening, his wish, his heart opened to compassion, and saw thousands, millions of suffering beings all around, and, saw that if he shared these teachings, he shared the realization that he'd come to, that he could maybe help others to find freedom in their own lives, And that's what he did. So the first of his teachings he gave was on this, the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. And he gave it to the teaching to 5 of his colleagues, comrades on the ascetic path, who at first were skeptical of him because he'd taken food and, was no longer practicing this very serious path of austerity. But then they see something different in him, and they sit down and they listen to him. And as happens in the discourses, they're awakened. They see the truth as well, and they find freedom in their own lives. And his teachings for the next 45 years, he awakened at the age of 35 and died at the age of 80. For the next 45 years of teaching in that area of northern India, excuse me, were really all the teachings revolve around helping people end suffering. Helping us find freedom in our lives. And you could see these, they're called the Four Noble Truths. And you can see them as 4 liberating truths about life, about existence. They're not truths in the sense that we often think about truth of like, this is what's true and you've got to believe it. It's not truth in the sense of you've got to take this on as a belief, but it's rather understandings that we can explore and practice in our own lives. So I sometimes think of them as the 4 noble propositions, the 4 ennobling propositions, 4 things to test in our own lives. And the Buddha said, don't believe this because I say it, or because a teacher says it, or because tradition hands it on, or because it feels good, or etc. Believe it because when you practice it, it actually leads to a benefit to you. It leads to well-being. If you do something else and it leads to harm, then obviously let that go. Don't follow that path. And he said, see for yourself. In the Pali language, the first language of the Buddha's teachings, the word is ehipassiko, see for yourself. Test it, see for yourself. And these 4 noble truths are framed in the form of a medical diagnosis. Suffering is the illness. That's what's wrong and that has to be dealt with. Suffering is the illness. The cause of suffering, which is craving, the Buddha taught, is the diagnosis of the illness. This is kind of what the problem is, the diagnosis. The end of suffering is the cure. So the cure for the illness, cure for the end of suffering, is freedom or nirvana. And the medicine to bring about the cure is the path to the end of suffering. You follow the path as the medicine to reach nirvana, to reach the end of suffering, to reach freedom. So, you might find this a helpful thing of like looking at the problem, looking at what causes the problem, looking at the end of the problem, the solution to the problem or the cure for the problem, and then the path or the medicine or what gets you to that end of suffering. And for the Buddha, there's a task associated with each of the Four Noble Truths. Actually, I'll hold that for a little bit. The tasks maybe to the end. And so I just want to look at these Four Noble Truths in, just take them one by one. And the question for me, and I think the most relevant question is, how do we use these teachings, these understandings in our own life? Sometimes you can think of, the Buddha's teachings as 4 of this and 5 of this and 8 of these. You've probably seen this long lists of teachings, and it's not necessarily the way our minds tend to work, most of us these days, but it's a kind of maybe a helpful way of kind of codifying things and, giving a skeleton to hang things on. But, these teachings aren't an abstraction. That the only real relevance of them is, do they help us to let go? Do they help us to let go of suffering in our own lives? So really we begin with what our own suffering, our own, what we perceive and experience as difficult or painful or challenging or unwanted. We kind of look, okay, and we begin by acknowledging, this is this is suffering. This is suffering. This is, this is unpleasant. This is difficult. The first noble truth is the truth of suffering. Philip Moffat, who teaches out on the West Coast and Spirit Rock Meditation Center, has a wonderful book on the Four Noble Truths called Dancing with Life. And then, Buddha's teachings of the Four Noble Truths. And in this book, he called suffering, he said, it's an unavoidable reality of ordinary, underline ordinary, human existence that is to be known and responded to wisely. And what he's getting at is that suffering is not unavoidable or it's not inevitable, but we experience it as, typically we experience different things as suffering. They're not inevitably suffering. Like the Buddha said, about suffering. He says, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair is suffering. Not to obtain what one wants is suffering. In short, the 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. Those are ways of understanding our experience. So all of these, sickness, aging, death, etc., are experienced as suffering, but they're not actually inherently suffering, because once we free ourselves, then they're no longer experienced as suffering. They're parts of life, yes. Sometimes they can be painful, but they're not inherently suffering. So, for example, the Buddha himself, after his awakening, there's no sense that sickness, and he did have sickness, he had, real back problems that prevented him from teaching different times, but there's no sense that he experienced this as, oh, life is unfair, why is this happening to me? That sense of, resisting the experience, but rather just, this is how life is. Life contains this. This is part of life. Just as death happens, and not like, oh, dying, why is it happening to me? But rather just accept this as part of life. So it's not inherently suffering, but we tend to experience these things as suffering because we're caught up in wanting things to be different. We want the things we like. We want to get rid of the things we don't like. So the word in the Pali language, the first written teachings of the Buddha, the word for suffering is dukkha, or the word in Pali is dukkha, that typically is translated into English as suffering. And Gil Fronsdal, another teacher out on the West Coast, a wonderful teacher, gives the derivation of dukkha as two words, du, meaning bad, du meaning bad, and kha, meaning the hub of a wheel. So you think of it as a hub of a wheel that's not turning as it should be. Like on a wagon train, the wheel is so a wheel out of kilter. So this is what we experience. Things are not the way we want them to be or the way we would like them to be. This is the sense of the Buddha, in the sense of that the Buddha is conveying of suffering. In the sense of this shouldn't be happening. This should be different. I don't want this. I want something else. As a teacher of Tony Bernhard gave 14 different synonyms for suffering, for dukkha. She says suffering, pain, unease, discontent, unsatisfactoriness, unhappiness, affliction, anxiety, dissatisfaction, discomfort, anguish, stress, misery, frustration. You get the idea. Things that we're not liking, we don't want this to be the case, we want things to be different. Have you experienced things, probably this morning, things that you didn't want to be the way they were, oh, I don't like this. Oh, I'm feeling tired, or I woke up with a crick in my neck. I didn't get enough sleep, or whatever. We oh God. And then easily we create a lot of stories around it. Oh, this is going to be a bad day for me today. We add on all these different things. So, if we can just keep at, okay, I've got a little pain in my neck. Okay, notice that, allow it, let it go. It doesn't have to be suffering, but it's when we add the resistance to it that's the suffering. So the first noble truth is really to acknowledge suffering, acknowledge the unpleasantness, acknowledge that I don't like this, I don't want this, and say, okay, I'm experiencing this as unpleasant, as difficult, as unwanted. And what is really key to understanding suffering is to really understand that where there's suffering, there's something that we're bringing to the situation that is really causing, making something into a problem. The Buddha said that the second noble truth, that the cause of suffering is craving or clinging. And really the key to understanding really suffering, and particularly the second noble truth, is to recognize that when we're suffering, in the Buddha's understanding, there's something we're doing or not doing that's fueling the suffering, that's creating or perpetuating it. So it's not just something bad is happening. Because something, quote, bad, that we might typically think of as bad, oh, I missed my plane. Okay, we might think, oh, typically we'd experience that as bad, or, a storm causing a lot of damage. Oh, that's a bad thing. But a bad thing in itself isn't suffering. It's only suffering if we if we get into a fight with it of like, this shouldn't be happening, this should be different. I don't like this. I don't want this. If we could take that physical pain or that missed flight and meet it with acceptance. Okay, I didn't want this to happen, but this happened and I'm going to work with it. Then that's not suffering. It's a difficult situation, perhaps. Might have to, take certain steps to, put out some money or whatever it might be. But it doesn't have to be suffering. Suffering is when we add something to the situation. You're probably familiar, or maybe familiar with the story of the two arrows. The first arrow, is the pain of something, the pain of a situation. I banged my elbow, ouch, that hurt. The second arrow is like when I add something to that, that, oh, why did I do this? Why am I so clumsy? Why am I so stupid? Why did they leave that table there where I was going to bang my elbow on it? Whatever. When we're adding something, some level of resistance to the experience, or we get angry about something, the anger is, feeling angry that's just an emotion. But if we add something to that, oh, this person is, they're always doing this, they're a terrible person, I hate them. That's where we add the suffering to the experience. If we can just see like, oh, anger arising. Can I see that? Can I do something about it if it's helpful? Can I change something if that's helpful? Can I accept what needs to be accepted? Then it doesn't need to be suffering. So this is kind of where they use the cliche, the rubber meets the road, because this is where we have, our own agency comes into it. I was going to say earlier that, the Buddha uses metaphors a lot in his teachings, whether it's about the arrow, the second arrow, whether it's about, seeing the Buddha and the teachings and the community as refuges or jewels, these kind of metaphors. And I was thinking, this isn't a metaphor that I'm aware of the Buddha using, because I don't think they were so common in his time in India. But the metaphor for me that's very helpful is to see these teachings of the Four Noble Truths and other teachings, but I'm focusing now on the Four Noble Truths, as keys to unlock ourselves from, if you like, the prison of suffering. That we have the key. If we can acknowledge suffering, then that's the key to freeing ourselves from suffering, freeing ourselves from pain and unnecessary grief. The word I find, probably more helpful than suffering for dukkha is unsatisfactoriness. Things aren't satisfactory. They're not the way we want them to be. So to think of each of these Four Noble Truths as keys to unlock ourselves from suffering, to find freedom from suffering. So recognizing that suffering is here. Okay, this is, I'm caught up in anger, or I'm feeling really stressed out right now. Just to begin with that and to acknowledge, to come back, recognize, oh yeah, this is what's present right now. And the way out of suffering, as talk more about, is to open to our experience, to allow what's here, rather than getting lost in the stories in our mind of this should be different, I don't want this, I don't like this is unfair, all of that. We just stay with our experience. So recognizing, acknowledging our suffering, and seeing the second noble truth now, seeing our own role in our suffering. Just maybe ask you to reflect in your own life of like, when you do find yourself caught up in a tangle, whether it's, in a relationship with somebody that like, oh, they're so, so mean, or they're unkind, or they're not doing what we want them to do, or we're fearful of what will happen if they continue with the behaviors that they're carrying out, etc. That we get caught up in these tangles in our lives. We get stuck, get tangled. Can you see, your own role in that, in perpetuating or fueling that situation? Perhaps by believing, this should be different than what it is. This person, think of somebody, that's difficult, a work colleague or a political figure that you think, that you really don't like, and you think, no, they should be different. They should be acting, they shouldn't be doing this. And the truth is, though, they are doing this. And this is the reality right now. And as long as you're fighting with the reality, as long as I'm fighting with reality, then I'm going to be suffering, because there's the reality and there's how I want things to be. And there's a conflict there. And in that conflict, there's a gap. And in that gap, there's suffering. So the invitation, I think, is for each of us when we find ourselves caught up in, this kind of tangle or unpleasantness or unsatisfactoriness, say, okay, what, if anything, am I adding to this situation? What am I bringing to this situation that is not helpful, that is actually helping throw fuel on the fire rather than, kind of putting the fire out? We put the fire out by being willing to be with our experience, being willing to just stay, see the change, see the impermanence of it. So suffering is really about the resistance to our experience, the resistance to what is, resistance to this moment, the resistance to reality, if you like, to the truth. Because the truth is that this is happening. This is how things are right now. And insofar as I'm in a fight with it, why is the traffic like this? Why am I caught up in traffic? I don't like this. I don't want this. Why is this person taking so long at the checkout? And I'm waiting here. As long as I get into that state of mind of this should be different, they should be different, then there's suffering. There's something I'm adding to the situation. That's the clinging that the Buddha talks about. And I find in my own life, if I find myself, when I have the presence of mind to see if when I'm caught up in something and say, okay, let me just pause here and notice that this doesn't feel pleasant right now. I'm stressed, or I'm angry, or I'm worried, or whatever. Okay, let me just stay with that. And notice, what am I adding to this experience? What am I adding that's unnecessary? Maybe it's a resistance to, this shouldn't be happening. They shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be taking so long. I shouldn't be feeling this. So it's the resistance, so suffering really is grasping, wanting things to be other than they are, wanting what we don't have, or to get rid of what we don't like, and to kind of avoid or escape from what's boring or what's uninteresting. Philip Moffat, who I mentioned before, he says, a nice quote on this, he says, when you're attached to your desire, life becomes unacceptable. You start living a hidden demand that life be other than it is, and then you suffer and cause others to suffer. You start living a hidden demand that life be other than it is. And that's really the heart of our suffering, is wanting life to be other than it is. And obviously, the cure for that, or the way of working with that, is through acceptance. We can change what it's wise or helpful to change, but ultimately, we begin with accepting that this moment is like this. It may not be the way I wanted it to be, but this is how things are right now. This traffic is how things are. This work colleague is how things are, how they are right now. This, so if I can make peace with this is how things are, which doesn't preclude changing, what can be changed, what can wisely be changed. So there's not a contradiction between acceptance and change. But change really does need to come from a place of acceptance, accepting the truth of this and saying, okay, this is what's here, and I'll do what I can to change it. And if I can't change it, then I'll surrender to this is how life is unfolding in this moment. I find a helpful test of whether craving and clinging is present. It can be in that kind of wanting mode or in that pushing away mode as well, aversion, etc. Is, can I pick something up and put it down without difficulty, without suffering? So if I can, there's nothing wrong with, looking forward to a nice meal in the evening, or thinking, oh, I'd be nice to have this, anything else that's pleasant. But when reality comes along and we don't get the thing that we're looking forward to, and then we feel disappointed, oh no, I was so looking forward to that, then that's an indication that there's suffering. If I can just say, okay, would have liked that, but maybe I'll have something else, okay, then that's not suffering. So, can I pick up and put down, so desire in itself isn't the problem. It's the clinging to desire. It's the clinging to the things that we want. It's a nice story of Ajahn Chah, the great Thai teacher of the last century, who had a nice cup that he really liked. He says, this is Jack Cornfield telling the story. He says, one day Ajahn Chah held up his beautiful Chinese teacup and he said, to me, this cup is already broken. Because I know its fate, I can enjoy it fully here and now. And when it's gone, it's gone. How is it to think about, the things in our life that we like a lot, that they're already broken, That doesn't mean that we don't, care about them and we don't enjoy them and use them, but not to cling to them. That's the kind of the way we release ourselves from suffering. So this understanding of clinging, the one side of clinging is that when we cling, we suffer. When we hold on to anything in that way of, craving or clinging, there's suffering attached to it because, life will happen. And if things don't turn out, the way we want them to we'll be disappointed. That wanting itself is the cause of suffering. You could say it is suffering. It's that wanting to hold on to or needing or got to have this or got to get rid of that. And so just as craving, clinging is the cause of suffering, then the end of suffering is the letting go of the clinging. So to see where we're holding on, and then to say, oh, I can actually let this go. I can change my relationship to this thing or this person or this situation. And this is the third noble truth, that there is an end to suffering. The Buddha called it nirvana or freedom. The deepest freedom, the deepest peace and happiness that comes from letting go of clinging. So just as clinging ties us to suffering, letting go of clinging brings us freedom from suffering. So the key is to acknowledge our suffering, acknowledge that this is painful, this is difficult, I'm not liking this. See our own role, the second noble truth, see our own role in fueling the suffering or creating the suffering or perpetuating the suffering, to see that we're adding something to our experience, and that's creating suffering. Once we acknowledge our suffering, I'm stuck, I'm tangled, I'm experiencing something that I don't like, I don't want, then it's possible to untangle ourselves. James Baldwin said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it is faced." So we have to turn towards acknowledge, when things feel like, when we feel tangled, when we feel stuck, we have to, okay, I'm noticing this, I recognize this. Facing and acknowledging our suffering is an essential step to releasing ourselves from the grip of suffering. We have to take refuge in the truth. This is how things are right now, rather than in denial or wishful thinking or bypassing our experience. So that's the first key, is to acknowledge our suffering. The second key to releasing ourselves from suffering is to investigate our own role. What am I adding to this? What am I clinging to that is creating or fueling this suffering? What second arrow am I adding to the difficulty I'm experiencing? You probably heard the expression, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. If we can experience pain as pain, oh, this is painful. Can I open to it? Can I experience it? Can I work with it skillfully? It's often not easy to do that, but we can work with it skillfully, rather than turning that pain into suffering. And when we resist the pain, the difficulties of life, the challenges of life, that's where we suffer, and that's where that we kind of get locked onto this wheel of suffering, where we keep perpetuating the same behaviors and experiencing suffering. But once we see our own role in fueling our suffering, then we can let go of suffering. It's like, sometimes it can be like really seeing that, if it's, say, an addiction, that the way in which this wanting, it's not so much the substance or the thing that we're addicted to, but it's this craving, this wanting, this neediness that is creating the suffering in my life. And the more I can see that this craving is really the source of the problem, then it's possible to let go and find freedom. And sometimes we're able to let go in a very immediate way of saying, no, I'm not going to keep, doing the same thing and fueling more and more suffering. I'm going to let go. But often it takes time. It takes, the habits go deep, and we have to kind of see it again and again and let go a little bit more and a little bit more. So the letting go of clinging is what leads to suffering. And that's where the path comes in, the fourth noble truth, that there's a skillful path of training in meditation, mindfulness, concentration, effort, in ethics, in cultivating virtue, cultivating wise, kind action in our lives and in the world, and cultivating wisdom. A path of training the Buddha called the Noble Eightfold Path, kind of developing all of these elements to find ourselves, to reach the end of suffering. So coming back to this metaphor of the keys, if we can look at our own lives and really look at where we get stuck, invite you just to kind of think about, where right now in your life, maybe there's nothing standing out very much, but often there's something we're resisting, something we're not willing to accept, not willing to, to acknowledge or be with. And so to kind of really shine the spotlight on that. And the key is that acknowledging that this is suffering, this is painful, this is difficult. And then to see our own role in it. This key of seeing how I'm fueling my suffering, fueling this suffering. And then the third key to see that it's possible to let go. And at the heart of letting go is learning to stay with our experience, learning to stay with our experience, this moment as it is. Just breathe into the tightness in the body, the thoughts coming up in the mind, the emotions as they come and go, learning to stay. If we can learn to stay, then we can deal with everything that arises. It can all come and go. And it doesn't need to perpetuate suffering. So, when you see that, when you identify what you're holding on to, what you're clinging to, then the question, can I let go of that clinging? And what is it that I need to let go of? Maybe it's the belief that this person should be different than they are. This family member, this colleague at work, they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. How often do we get caught up in this, this life should be different, this person should be different, which is not to say that, people don't behave badly. Of course they do. Of course we do, but it's to say that when we get into that struggle that this should be different than it is, that's where we're adding to. That's where we're creating the second arrow and the third arrow and all the other arrows that we add on. So to see that we can let go, and that's really the heart of our practice, seeing the clinging and letting go, and cultivating the path. And at the heart of this, very heart of this practice is awareness. What we practice with mindfulness, being aware, shining the spotlight directly on our experience. So I'm going to be exploring these themes actually in a course I'm doing beginning in a couple of weeks, September 19th, 6 weeks online on Tuesday evenings, where I'm looking at these teachings, the Four Noble Truths, and also the foundations of mindfulness, particularly the teachings of mindfulness, as the Buddha said, as a direct path to liberation. And a third set of teachings, the heart practices, as you're probably familiar with, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, and how these teachings provide us with keys to kind of to unlock ourselves from suffering, to find freedom in our own lives. So what I'd like to do is, Emily will lead us in some movement now. We'll come back and we'll have a meditation. Kind of like to incorporate some of this into our practice and into our exploration. So thank you. I hope this is something helpful, things to work with here today, and invite Emily to lead us in some movement. Thank you, Emily. Thanks.
Yes, great. How wonderful. Yes, let me invite you to add your sense of the thoughts, everything going on in your head, and then add your body to it. Add the movement, swaying from side to side, shifting your weight, and then looking over to one side and looking over to the other. What are you seeing? Noticing that sense and the air against your skin on your arms. And also the sense of hearing, just maybe even the rustle of your clothing. And then open up wide, expanding out, lifting your arms up And grasp your left wrist in your right hand. Tilt over to the right, lengthening the side of your body on the left, breathing into that left rib cage. And soften down, less effort. Inhale up. Switch hands, extending out to the right. No, it's the left. Sorry. Breathing in and letting go. Just softening your left shoulder. Inhale up. Float your arms down, roll your shoulders together. And roll them the other way. Draw your hands out in front. We're going to do a move that crosses meridians of the brain. Right hand, right wrist on top of the left. Clasp your hands and then draw a sideways figure 8. Finding the movement as you draw, changing. And now draw it the other way, extending out. And then come to center, place the left wrist on top, clasping your hands. Take a moment to notice and draw that figure 8 again. Come to center and go the other way. And come to center. Open up wide again and then bend at the elbows. Holding your elbows up, drop your hands down. And rise. Exhale, dropping down. Inhale, rise up, extend your arms out, flip up that left palm, take a look, and on the inhale, switch over to the right side, turning that left arm around, back to the left, back to the right, back to the left, last to the right. Drop your arms down, roll your shoulders independently. And roll it the other way. Another shoulder move. Bring your hands behind your waist. Pressing, just noticing your feet against the earth. Inhale, lifting your head, lifting your chest. Exhale, draw your hands down. Below the waist, engaging your shoulder blades. And back to the waist. Again, inhale, lifting your head and chest. Exhale, dropping your hands down. Breath in. Exhale. Back to your waist, float your arms up. Take a moment to fly. And now bring your hands above your knees, extending out into a flat back. Noticing the strength of your legs, the strength of your pelvis, and then drop your head down, shoulders. Just letting go into the pull of gravity. Breathing in, maybe even a little left and exhale, softening down. You can support yourself with your hands on your legs or just hold. Just drop them down. But most of all, press on your feet, lifting the legs into engaged muscles. And then bring your hands above your knees, tuck under your tailbone, roll up the spine. Lifting up, shoulders around your ears, exhale down. And we'll do a last move, drawing the arms up, palms together, down to your heart, turning them out to everyone here, down to the earth. And on the exhale, whoosh, drawing up, down to your heart, out to the group, appreciating the earth. And whoosh. And finally, down to your heart, take a bow. Thank you for your practice.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. As always, lovely movement. Thank you. So what I'd like to do in the remaining time is we'll have a meditation and some announcements to finish off. Invite anyone who'd like to after 12 to stay around, and we'll have a discussion. We won't have time to do that in the regular session, but I'll be around and we can do some sharing, anything that came up in the talk or in the session as a whole. So invite anyone who'd like to stay around for that. So let's again, with the initial meditation and the talk and Emily leading us in movement, just checking inward with what's present for you right now. Get as comfortable as you can on your chair or your cushion. You can let your eyes close if that's comfortable. You might take a few deeper breaths. Breathing in, calming the body. Breathing out, calming the mind. Just letting yourself settle into being here. You could invite a smile or a half smile to your face, to your corners of your eyes and your mouth. Just inviting in that way an opening of the heart, your sense of connection with yourself and with everyone here. Maybe wishing everyone well, wishing yourself well. And just bringing a kind, non-judging awareness to whatever you're experiencing right now, whatever bodily feelings are here. Whatever your mood might be right now, or whatever emotions might be present, mind states. Just bring a kind and curious attention to your experience. And just let whatever is here be here. Let it come, let it be, and let it go when it's ready to go. you might just notice if there's any resistance right now to really anything that you're experiencing. Any sense of, I don't like this, I don't want this, I want something else, I need something. Any feeling, difficulty or unpleasantness. And if you notice anything, see if you can see if there's anything that you're adding to the situation or the experience. An example would be if you're feeling a bit tired or a bit sleepy, very easy to add to that experience, to have the feeling, oh, I don't like this, I don't want this. And rather than, fueling those thoughts about this should be different, just notice that resistance, that wanting, if there's wanting things to be different. And see if you can just allow whatever is here to be here. Let the feelings, sensations come. Let them be. Let them go. The Buddha taught that the path to the end of suffering, to letting go of suffering, is the path of awareness, being with our experience as it is. Just saying yes to what's here. Pema Chodron uses the Tibetan term of Shenpa, which kind of translates as being hooked, the way we get hooked in suffering. She says the only way to ease our pain is to experience it fully. She says, learn to stay with uneasiness, learn to stay with the tightening, learn to stay with the itch and the urge of Shenpa, so that the habitual chain reaction doesn't continue to rule our lives, and the patterns that we consider unhelpful don't keep getting stronger. as the days and months and years go by. Just this being with our experience. Is there anything right now that you could let go of that might ease the suffering, might soften any clinging or any resistance to your experience? Is there any area of your life right now where you could shine the light of awareness on some stickiness, some tangle, being entangled, or some resistance that you're experiencing, wanting something? You could then kind of use these practices, these keys to untangle yourself from. You can just keep coming back. The mind may go off. We might get caught up in our escape mechanisms for avoiding our experience and acting out perhaps unskillful habits. Just when we see that, we can come back, always coming back to this moment. Eckhart Tolle says, anything unconscious dissolves when you shine the light of consciousness on it. Anything unconscious dissolves when you shine the light of consciousness on it. So we keep coming back and shining the light of consciousness, of awareness on our experience. Because what isn't seen, we play out unconsciously. As Jung said, what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. And so, key is to shine the light of consciousness on our experience, to be with this moment, to see what's revealed when we do stay, when we open to our experience. David White, short poem. He says, enough, these few words are enough. If not, these words, this breath. If not this breath, this sitting here, this opening to the life we have refused again and again until now. Until now. Thank you, everyone. We're going to finish the formal session now with just a few announcements. I'll just begin and then pass it to Emily or who today. We'll see. I just want to mention again that I'll be teaching a 6-week course on the Buddha's teachings of keys to freeing the heart, beginning on September 19th, going to October 24th, 6 Tuesdays, 7:15 to 9 p.m. We can share. I'll share the link to that if Dan, if that's available, could maybe put that up there. Also mention, as we do each week, that these sessions are offered to the community. There's no set charge for cost for the sessions, but you're invited, if you're inclined and if you're able, to make a donation. In the tradition of generosity, the word in Pali is dana, generosity, and that's how the teachings have come down through 2,500 years, and we're committed to keeping the tradition going, this kind of flow of